As night falls over the remote northern lands, silence settles like snow. A small Viking village lies tucked between icy fjords and towering pine-covered mountains. Longhouses, built from timber and sod, glow softly from within, their small windows flickering with the light of hearth fires. Outside, a gentle snowfall drapes the rooftops, muffling every sound. The only movement is the slow spiral of smoke rising into the stillness of the starlit sky. And far above, the northern lights shimmer, a curtain of pale green and violet dancing across the heavens. The Vikings called it the Bifrost, the bridge between Midgard and Asgard, between Earth and the realm of gods. You hear no words, only the sound of wind weaving through the trees, the creak of old wood, the occasional crack of frost splitting in the ground beneath the snow. Inside, families have gathered close to the fire. Children rest on straw bedding, wrapped in furs. The warmth of the hearth pulses like a heartbeat at the center of the room. Someone hums a slow lullaby, maybe an old saga being whispered, barely audible, like it's meant only for the flames and the night. Now imagine, you are there, sitting quietly by the hearth, the smell of wood smoke and pine in the air, your body slowly sinking into calm. You're safe, sheltered from the cold, surrounded by the deep, ancient quiet of the Viking world. This is where our journey begins, in the frozen north, where sleep comes with the snow. Before sleep, there was food. And in the Viking world, evening meals were a sacred time, a moment of warmth, family, and ritual. Inside the longhouse, the hearth fire crackles gently, casting golden light across wooden beams, darkened by years of smoke. Hanging above the fire, a large iron pot simmers slowly. Its contents, a thick, earthy stew, made from root vegetables, barley, and perhaps a little salted meat, if the season was kind. The smell is rich and grounding, the kind of scent that clings to wool cloaks and drifts into dreams. Rough wooden bowls are passed hand to hand. A flat round of barley bread sits beside each one, hard at the edges, soft in the middle. No utensils, just fingers, calloused and strong, dipped into the warmth. Children sit quietly now, listening to the elders speak in low, steady voices. Stories of gods and heroes, tales of voyages across the sea. The fire is the center, and around it, the world narrows, just stew, bread, and breath. Mead is poured, golden and slightly sweet. It warms the throat and quiets the mind. A single cup may be shared, passed from person to person, like a small ceremony of trust. There's laughter, but softly. There's comfort, but without luxury. Just enough, always just enough. And soon, the bowls are empty. The fire still crackles. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Inside, full bellies and heavy eyelids signal that the night is ready to deepen. Sleep waits, but first, the fire must be banked, and the stories always must finish their final line. There were no bedrooms in the way we think of them now. In a Viking longhouse, sleep was not a private act, but something shared with family, with animals, with the quiet breath of firelight and frost. The longhouse was one room, stretching from end to end, like the hull of an upside-down ship. Along the walls, raised wooden platforms served as sleeping areas, narrow, lined with straw or dried grasses, and softened with furs and woolen blankets. Families slept side by side, curled together for warmth. Parents, children, and sometimes grandparents, a single row of slow, steady breathing. Overhead, thick wooden beams held the roof in place. Sometimes you'd hear the rustle of birds nesting there, or the soft patter of melting snow dripping through tiny cracks. The hearth, always near the center, stayed burning through the night. It gave heat, it gave safety, but it also gave smoke, and everything smelled faintly of ash, pine, and old earth. There were no doors between spaces, only the rhythm of sleep and fire to divide the evening from the day. Clothing hung from wooden pegs on the wall, tunics, cloaks, leather belts, a few iron tools, maybe a hunting bow, perhaps a carved idol of Thor or Freyja, stood quietly in a corner, watching over the sleepers. There was comfort here, in the simplicity. No walls to hide behind, no rooms to separate. Just one space, one breath, one long, slow descent into sleep, together. A Viking's bed was simple, but not without thought. In the harsh northern climate, warmth was life, and sleep was its own kind of survival. Most beds were little more than wooden frames or flat platforms built against the wall. On top of these, bundles of straw or dried rushes formed the base, carefully layered, fluffed by hand, and sometimes changed with the seasons. The sound of it, that quiet rustle of straw as someone shifts in their sleep, was just another voice in the longhouse. Familiar, comforting. Over the straw, thick animal skins were laid, reindeer, sheep, or sometimes bear, their fur soft, dense and warm. The hides smelled of smoke and earth, but they carried the warmth of the creatures they once were. Woolen blankets, hand-woven and heavy, came next, dyed with plants, or left in natural shades of grey and brown. These blankets held in heat and softened the roughness beneath. The fibers itched a little, but they were made by hand, often by the same hands that would later pull them over tired shoulders. Children might share a single fur, couples wrapped in one woolen sheet, and older folk often had extra layers, stacked carefully, a silent recognition of age and the cold that came with it. There were no pillows, not really, sometimes folded cloaks, or a rolled-up tunic, placed beneath the head, but most simply lay flat, the ground close, the fire nearby, and the night pressing gently at the edges. This was sleep, the Viking way, layered, communal, and always within reach of warmth. In the center of every Viking longhouse, there was fire, not just for cooking or light, but for life. The hearth was the heart, the soul, and the quiet pulse of the night. Rough stones formed its base, surrounded by charred wood and soot-darkened floorboards. Above it, a narrow vent in the roof let the smoke rise, though it never escaped entirely. The air was always thick with the smell of burning pine and birch. The fire burned low at night, a careful balance, enough to warm, but not enough to blaze. Too much smoke, and sleep was suffocating. Too little heat, and the frost would creep in along the floor. Whoever kept the fire alive held a sacred duty. It might be the mother of the household, or an older child learning when to stoke, when to leave it be. Fingers black with soot, eyes half closed, one final stir before sleep. And in the dark of winter, when the nights lasted for weeks, the hearth became the only sun, a flickering reminder that warmth could still be found, that the dark was not total. People lay near it, their faces turned toward the orange glow. Shadows danced along the wooden walls, slow and lazy, like spirits keeping watch. Even in dreams, the fire was never far. You could hear it, the pop of sap, the hiss of steam from a damp log. It whispered to the sleeping ears, a rhythm as steady as a lullaby. Outside, snow and silence. Inside, fire and breath. That was the world, that was home. When the longhouse grew quiet, and the fire dimmed to a slow, pulsing glow, the village itself began to whisper. The night in a Viking settlement wasn't silent, not truly. Instead, it was filled with the soft sounds of life continuing, just beneath sleep. You might hear the wind first, low and steady, weaving through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying with it the scent of snow and the rustle of distant trees. It came in waves, sometimes rising like a voice, sometimes fading into nothing. Outside, the hooves of animals shifting in the cold earth. Goats huddled together in the small pens near the longhouses, snorting, chewing, occasionally letting out a short bleat in their sleep. Chickens nestled under makeshift coops, fluttering once, then still. The creak of timber, ancient wood that moved with temperature and time, was a constant rhythm. It spoke in slow groans and soft knocks, as if the house itself were breathing, dreaming. From another home, not far off, came the distant sound of someone coughing, or the low murmur of voices still awake, wrapped in furs and stories. Sometimes the dogs would stir, their ears twitching, their tails thudding once against the floor as they repositioned. Watchful, even in rest. And outside, deeper still, the forest, the call of an owl, the soft crunch of a fox in snow, or, far off, the eerie echo of wolves, their howls threading through the darkness like song. Yet none of it felt threatening. This was a known world. These were familiar sounds. For the Viking villagers, they were the lullabies of the land, reminding them that even in sleep, they were part of something larger, older, and always awake. Sometime after midnight, when even the embers had faded to a faint red glow, the snow would begin to fall again. At first, it was soft, a hush in the air, like the sky exhaling. Outside the longhouse, the flakes drifted gently from the darkness, piling silently along the roof, the fences, the sloped edges of the animal sheds. Inside, those who stirred in their sleep might hear it, not the snow itself, but what followed, the slow creak of the roof beams under the growing weight, the crackle of frost expanding in the wood. the faint tap-tap of melting ice dripping onto packed earth. Every sound was slow, careful, as if even the world didn't want to wake the sleepers. The thatched roofs of Viking homes were made thick and steep, built to bear snow. But still, the timber groaned, a deep wooden sound that rumbled through the walls like a sigh. Sometimes, a gust of wind would knock snow loose from a branch or a ledge, and it would fall with a soft thump onto the roof. For just a moment, someone might open their eyes, listen, then drift back down, comforted by the knowledge that the walls still stood, the roof still held, and the snow would cover them like a second blanket. It was in these moments, these gentle shifting movements of the world, that sleep deepened, the fire faded, dreams crept in like shadows, and outside, the village disappeared under a growing layer of white, quiet and slow, as if the land itself were falling asleep. In the quiet of the longhouse, beneath the flicker of dying embers, the people of the Viking world settled into their nightly places, not chosen by comfort, but by need, by custom, and by closeness. There were no separate rooms, no beds behind doors. The entire family slept in one long shared space, arranged with quiet intention. The parents, often the mother and father, slept near the center, closest to the hearth, where the warmth lingered longest. Between them, or tucked just beyond, were the youngest children, swaddled in furs, their tiny forms curled like sleeping animals, their breath rising in small clouds on cold nights. Older children and extended family lined the outer edges of the sleeping platforms. Some lay back to back, others curled together, their feet wrapped in wool, their shoulders pressed for warmth. It was not just custom, it was survival. In many homes, elders had a special place, not far from the fire, but apart from the bustle. Age was respected, their sleep was considered sacred. They might speak into the fire before bed, or murmur old songs that only they remembered. Occasionally, a traveler or guest would sleep near the door, not for lack of welcome, but as an ancient courtesy. In case danger came in the night, it was they who would meet it first, and animals too, sometimes shared the space. A favored dog, a lamb born too early, even a chicken roosting in the corner, all part of the night's quiet gathering. There were no walls between them, only breath, only bodies, only the slow fading of wakefulness. Sleep came as a village, as a home, as one. In the Viking longhouse, animals were more than just livelihood. They were part of the family, part of the warmth, and part of the night. During the coldest months, many animals came inside, not out of affection, but out of necessity. The same walls that kept out the wind had to protect the goats, the sheep, and sometimes the cows that the family depended on. Along the far end of the longhouse, a space was set aside, lower than the sleeping platforms, slightly sunken to help with drainage and mess. Here, animals bedded down on straw, just a few feet from where people slept. At night, their breath fogged in the air, just like the humans. You could hear the low snort of a cow, the shuffle of hooves in the straw, the soft chewing of cud in the dark. It was a strange kind of lullaby, rhythmic, alive, grounding. Chickens might nest in corners or beneath benches. A dog, loyal and alert, would lie stretched near the doorway, ears half alert even in sleep. The boundary between domestic and wild blurred in these spaces, everything living, everything breathing under the same roof. Of course, it wasn't always pleasant. There were smells, noises, sudden movements. But this was the reality of Viking life. The animals gave heat. Their presence was a kind of protection from the cold, from hunger, from the sense of isolation that could settle in during long winter nights. And so sleep came not in silence, but in a shared symphony, people and animals alike, wrapped in straw, in skins, in breath, waiting for morning together. In the deep of winter, the walls of a Viking longhouse held more than just people. They held the heartbeat of the entire household, both human and animal. By nightfall, the animals were already inside, sheep and goats huddled in the far end of the hall, separated by low partitions, their warm bodies packed close together. A cow might be brought in if the cold was severe, her slow, steady breathing filling the space like a living furnace. It wasn't strange, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was simply how things were. The animals belonged there, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of belonging. Their warmth helped keep the frost from settling too deeply on sleeping limbs. Their presence, familiar and unspoken, was as constant as the fire. The sounds of the night were richer for it, the soft clatter of hooves shifting, the slow rhythm of chewing, the occasional huff of warm breath. Not noise, not really, just another layer of life, like the crackle of firewood or the rustle of blankets. Children sometimes reached out to touch a lamb resting near the straw bed. A dog might shift closer, curling up against a human leg, its fur coarse but warm. In this shared warmth, this blending of sleep and survival, there was a sense of deep peace, of understanding between species, all living things, gathered close, guarding one another from the night. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, nothing moved that didn't need to. The longhouse sighed with breath, with fire, with fur. Sleep settled in gently, without words. As the night wore on, and the fire's glow softened, the final ritual of the day unfolded, the sharing of drink. In the Viking world, this was more than habit, it was tradition, a quiet ceremony, to mark the passing from wakefulness to rest. Mead was the drink of choice, a golden fermented honey wine, thick, slightly sweet and warming, brewed at home in small wooden barrels, poured into carved wooden cups or simple horn vessels. Sometimes it was beer, dark and grainy, flavored with herbs like juniper or yarrow, not strong by modern standards, but comforting in its own earthy way. The drink would pass from hand to hand in silence, or with a few quiet words, perhaps a blessing, perhaps a story, perhaps nothing at all. One sip, then another, not to get drunk, not at this hour, but to warm the belly, ease the breath, and soften the edge of the day. Children might drink warm goat's milk or a watered-down broth, while the adults shared the mead. Even the elders, wrapped in furs, would raise a cup slowly, their fingers curled with age, their eyes half closed. In some homes, a small offering of drink was set aside, poured near the hearth, or left at a wooden idol's feet, a gift for the spirits, a thank you for the warmth, for the food, for surviving another day. And after the final cup, the longhouse grew still. The fire crackled low, the cups were set aside, and sleep crept in, gentle and steady, like the drink itself, slow, warm and quiet. Long before sleep came, stories filled the space between the fire and the dark. In Viking life, storytelling wasn't entertainment, it was tradition, memory, and magic. Each night, as bellies were filled and the fire burned low, the elders would begin to speak, not loudly, not with grand gestures, but with calm, steady voices. Voices worn by time, heavy with knowledge, and softened by the hush of flame and snow. They told of the gods, Odin's endless search for wisdom, Thor's hammer striking thunder, Freya riding her chariot of cats across the sky. They spoke of monsters in the deep woods, and sea serpents that curled around the world, of giants, elves, dwarves, and spirits that lived just out of sight. The children listened wide-eyed, tucked beneath woolen blankets. The adults, though they'd heard the tales 100 times, listened too, not for the surprise, but for the rhythm. The way the stories flowed like wind through pine trees, like smoke through rafters. Some stories were short, like sparks, others stretched out, winding slowly like a frozen river, but all of them carried something ancient, something older than the longhouse, older than the snow. Sometimes the storyteller paused, letting the silence speak for itself, letting the crackle of the fire fill in the missing words. And when the tale was done, no one clapped, no one spoke. The room simply breathed, and sleep, waiting patiently in the shadows, stepped quietly forward. Because in a world without books, without clocks, without screens, a story was the softest, most human way to end the day. After the stories were told, and the fire began to flicker low, the last sounds of the night were often songs, soft, slow, and ancient. Old Norse lullabies weren't like the ones we know today. They were simple, rhythmic chants, often just a few lines, repeated like a quiet heartbeat. Their purpose wasn't only to soothe, but to protect, to guard the dreams of children, to hold the cold at bay. A mother might hum as she wrapped her child in furs, just a few gentle syllables, carried like smoke through the dark. The tune didn't need words, or if it had them, they were old, worn smooth by time. Lines about wolves at the door, but none brave enough to come inside. Lines about spirits watching from the trees, now turned to sleep. Sometimes, the chant was for the gods, a whispered calling to Frigg, the goddess of motherhood, or a blessing from Njordra to keep the winds calm while the house rested. The sound was low, nearly a whisper, a vibration more than a melody, something that rose with the breath and fell again, like the motion of snow through still air. Even those who did not sing could feel it, the hush of song in the bones of the house, the way it curved around beams and drifted into dreams. Outside, the wind hummed its own lullaby. The trees answered. The roof creaked once more, and inside, in the quietest corner of the longhouse, a child's eyes slowly closed, not in fear, not in hurry, but in the ancient rhythm of sleep. Bedtime for children in a Viking household was not marked by clocks or bedtime books. It came with the rhythm of the fire, the soft hush of voices, and the quieting of the day. As the last bowls were cleared, and the longhouse dimmed, children began to find their place among the firs. The youngest were closest to their parents, sometimes held in a mother's arms until they drifted off, their small hands clutching a woolen edge, their cheeks pink from the fire's warmth. Older children nestled together, shoulder to shoulder, beneath shared blankets. They whispered to each other about the day, about animals they'd seen, games they'd played, or stories just told. There were no toys beside the bed, no lights to leave on, but there was comfort in the closeness, a sibling's breath, a parent's arm stretched gently across a child's legs, the dog's steady breathing nearby. Bedtime wasn't rushed. It was a slow descent, marked by songs, by murmurs, by stillness. Sometimes, before sleep, a child would ask a question. Why do the northern lights dance? Or, do the gods ever sleep too? And an elder might answer softly, or not at all, letting the silence be its own kind of wisdom. The night wrapped around them like a second skin, heavy furs above, warm straw below. Outside, the cold deepened, but inside, a child's sleep came easily. Not because the world was soft, but because it was known, predictable, safe. And in that closeness of family, of fire, of the old wooden beams creaking overhead, dreams were not something separate from life. They were just the next step in the story. The cold in the Viking world wasn't just a season, it was a constant presence. It slipped through the cracks, curled along the floor and waited at the door. But the people who lived with it didn't fear it. They knew how to keep it out. The first defense was the house itself, thick walls built from timber and earth, stuffed with moss or wool to block the wind. Roofs thatched in layers, sloped steeply so that snow would slide away instead of settling too deep. Inside, warmth came from the fire, but also from the layers. Straw covered the floor, furs covered the bodies, wool wrapped around shoulders, feet and hands. At night, families slept close, bodies touching, heat shared. Even a single animal sleeping nearby could make the difference. A goat's breath, a dog's warmth, a cow's steady body beside the wall. Cloaks were sometimes worn to bed, thick, hand-woven, and often lined with skin. People wrapped themselves tightly, turning their backs to the cold walls and facing the fire, even in sleep. Some stuffed dried herbs in their bedding, thyme, heather, or sage, believed to bring warmth, health, or pleasant dreams. The cold never vanished, but it was managed, honored. It reminded people to gather, to prepare, to be still. And as sleep took hold, the cold stayed outside, tapping gently at the door, but never truly invited in. Before the age of linen sheets and feather-filled quilts, there were furs, heavy, warm, earth-scented, cloaks and hides that did more than cover the body. They protected it, anchored it, wrapped it in the memory of the wild. Vikings didn't separate day from night with different garments. The same cloak that shielded them from wind and rain became their blanket when darkness fell, laid across shoulders, tucked around feet, pulled up over the head if the night grew bitter. Furs were layered with care. The largest hides, from bear or deer, went on top, catching the cold and holding it back. Closer to the body came the softer skins, sheepskin, lined with thick, curly wool. They weren't clean in the modern sense, but they were known, trusted, familiar. Each piece had a story. A fur might be passed down from father to son, its seams repaired again and again. A cloak might carry the scent of smoke and sea, of the path walked that day, or of many winters past. In larger families, these were shared. Children snuggled beneath the same hide, couples curled beneath a single thick woolen wrap, their bodies warming each other more than any fabric could. There was no need for softness in the modern sense. The furs didn't need to be delicate. They needed to be real, needed to hold heat, needed to last. And they did, night after night, year after year, until the fur grew thin, until the cloak lost its edge. And then, it was replaced, not with something new, but with something just as old. just as strong. Sleep came beneath these layers, heavy, grounding, like being wrapped in the land itself. In the Viking world, there was no such thing as pajamas. No special garments meant only for sleep. What you wore to bed was what you wore to live. Some went to sleep in their daily tunics, woolen, coarse but warm. Others, especially in colder months, kept on their cloaks or layered furs over their shoulders. In milder weather, people might sleep with fewer layers, or, if they had enough hides to cover them, with none at all. Sleepwear wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. The key was warmth, not softness. Men and women alike wrapped themselves tightly before lying down. Loose garments could let in cold, so belts were sometimes kept on. Boots remained close by, a knife perhaps, tucked beneath a blanket's edge. Not for fear, but for familiarity. Children often wore simple woolen shifts, hand-stitched, passed from sibling to sibling. They curled beneath blankets with hair tangled, cheeks flushed from firelight and sleep. Elders, their bones more sensitive to cold, bundled heavily, sometimes with scarves tied around heads, or hands wrapped in linen strips. The concept of private nightwear didn't exist. There was no privacy in a longhouse, only shared warmth, shared air, shared breath. And so, sleep came not in luxury, but in layers, not in silk, but in skin, and wool, and fur, in the same garments that had walked through snow, through rain, through fields and fjords, now resting quietly until the morning came. In the stillness of a Viking night, dreams were never taken lightly. They were not just fragments of thought, they were messages, warnings, visions from the gods, or whispers from ancestors long gone. The Norse believed that sleep was not just rest but a journey. The soul, or hugra, could drift beyond the body while sleeping, traveling into other realms, into Asgard, into the land of the dead, or into hidden places where fate took shape. Some dreams were clear and bold, filled with symbols like wolves, ships, or swords. Others came as shadows, flickering like northern lights across the edge of sleep. But all dreams carried weight. A dream of a raven might signal a coming battle. A dream of the sea could mean a voyage ahead. A loved one appearing in a dream might be bringing news or calling the sleeper toward death. Children's dreams were watched carefully. A child who dreamed often or spoke of strange things upon waking might be gifted with Sidra, the sight, a calling toward magic, toward prophecy. Elders often served as interpreters. In the morning, gathered near the fire, they would listen to a retelling of a dream, nodding slowly, lips pursed, reading meaning between each word. Some feared their dreams, others welcomed them, but none ignored them. And as the longhouse slept, the dreams swirled through the dark, silent, invisible, but powerful, touching each sleeper with a story all their own. For the Norse, sleep was not merely rest, it was a doorway, a quiet crossing into realms unseen, where spirits moved freely, and the boundaries of the world grew thin. They believed that while the body rested, the spirit could drift out of the longhouse, beyond the forests, over the cold seas, and into the lands of the gods, the dead, or the hidden beings who shaped fate in silence. This journey was not always chosen. Sometimes the soul left quietly, wandering like mist. Other times, it was drawn, called by ancestors, or guided by dreams, stepping through the veil that separates the living from what lies beyond. To the Vikings, this wasn't frightening. It was expected, part of life. Just as the warrior ventured into unknown lands by ship, so too did the sleeping mind travel across unseen waters. Certain people, seers, wise women, Völa, were believed to walk both worlds even while awake, but for most, it was in sleep that the spirit truly reached out, a gift given each night and taken back gently by the morning. That's why the longhouse was quiet as dreams deepened, why stories ended with silence, why even the fire was allowed to settle into embers, so that nothing disturbed the passage. The spirit world didn't shout, it whispered. It moved like snow, like shadow, like the breath of someone sleeping beside you, steady and sacred. And in that space between firelight and dawn, the soul could find truths that waking eyes might never see. In the hush of a Viking night, with the fire burning low and the world wrapped in snow, the sleeping mind often wandered far beyond fjords, beyond stars, into the high halls of the gods themselves. The realm of the gods, Asgard, was not some distant heaven. It was near, just beyond the edge of what the eyes could see. and sleep was the bridge, the silent path walked by those whose spirits were light enough to drift. In dreams, a sleeper might find themselves standing before the gates of Valhalla, its golden roof glowing with the light of battle and feast, or wandering the meadows of Folkvang, where Freyja welcomed the fallen with gentler arms. Some dreamers rode with Odin's wolves through the sky, or followed Thor as he thundered across the clouds. Others sat at the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree, watching its branches stretch across all things, roots curling through realms of gods, men and monsters. To dream of the gods was no small thing. It could mean favor, or warning, or destiny awakening in the quiet of night. These dreams were remembered, shared in whispers at dawn. Not every dreamer visited the gods, but those who did carried something back with them, a flicker of divine light, hidden behind the eyes, lingering like smoke in the breath. And so, as the longhouse slept, and the snow fell silently outside, a few sleepers journeyed where no ship could sail, to halls of gold and skies of fire, and returned before first light, hearts quietly changed. Before sleep, there were rituals, quiet gestures, words spoken not loudly, but with intention, woven into the firelight, the breath of animals, the slow hush settling over the longhouse. A Viking family didn't kneel or fold hands in prayer as we might imagine. Their rituals were older, earthbound, woven into the rhythm of daily life. And sleep, like birth, like battle, was something worth speaking to the gods about. At the end of the night, someone, often the matron of the household, might place a small token near the hearth, a few drops of mead, a sliver of bread, a carved symbol pressed gently into the ash, a simple gift, offered to Frigg, goddess of home and sleep, or to Thor, to protect the house through the night. Whispers were made into the flames, not always in full sentences, sometimes just a name, sometimes just a breath. The fire was a messenger, smoke curling upward, carrying intentions into the dark. Children were taught these customs early, to greet the night with respect, to name the gods before closing their eyes, to thank the land, the house and the warmth that kept them safe. If a dream was hoped for, a vision, a sign, it might be requested, not demanded, never demanded. The gods answered as they wished, not when called. Some marked their beds with simple charms, a piece of iron, a small rune stone, a bundle of herbs tied with string, protection, blessing, a barrier between sleep and what might wander too close in the dark. These were not grand rituals, but they were steady, old, sacred, and with them, the house grew still. The fire dimmed, and the long ancient night took one more breath before beginning its quiet watch. In the Viking home, when the fire dimmed and the air turned cold, it was often the matron, the mother, the keeper of the hearth who held the night together. Her role wasn't just to tend to the children or to prepare the food, it was to carry the rhythm of the home, to know when to stoke the fire, when to speak, when to let silence settle. She was often the last to sleep, moving quietly through the longhouse, checking the embers, making sure the bedding was tucked, that no child had kicked away their fur in the dark. Her hands, rough from spinning and weaving, touched the faces of her family with practiced tenderness. She might whisper a lullaby, or hum the same tune her own mother once sang to her. She knew every creak in the timber, every draft in the wall. Her body carried the map of the home, where warmth lingered, where cold slipped in. If prayers were spoken, they often came from her lips. If a charm was hung over the door, it was her hands that tied it. And if something stirred in the dark, a noise outside, a shifting shadow, it was she who sat up first, eyes adjusting, heart steady. The children knew her breath, the rhythm of her footsteps, the sound of her voice when she said, "All is well." And so, under her watch, the longhouse exhaled, the animals grew still, the children sank deeper into dreams, and even the fire, now mostly ash, seemed to rest more gently. For as long as she remained awake, no harm could reach them, not through cold, not through fear, not through night. Long before electricity and glowing screens, the night was lit by flame, faint, flickering, fragile. In the Viking longhouse, light came from oil lamps and tallow candles, small, humble flames that softened the darkness but never chased it away. These weren't sources of brightness, but of presence, of warmth, of quiet company. Oil lamps were carved from stone or shaped from clay, filled with animal fat or fish oil. A single strand of moss or twisted linen, served as the wick. When lit, it burned low and steady, casting a gentle amber glow. Candles, when they could be made, were precious. Formed from tallow, they gave a steady flame, warm and slightly sweet-smelling, reminding everyone of kitchens and winter stores. The light didn't reach every corner. Shadows clung to the beams, stretched along the floor, curled behind fur-draped beds. The house seemed larger by night, deeper, as though the flicker of flame opened a path to older times, to deeper silences. Children watched the dance of shadows and imagined stories in them, creatures of myth and memory, not always frightening, often just curious, just there. Sometimes, a lamp was left burning through the night, its soft glow a guardian in the dark. Other nights, it was allowed to fade, leaving only the embers and the soft light of stars slipping through a vent in the roof. In this half-light, the line between waking and dreaming blurred, time slowed, thoughts softened, and under this gentle glow, sleep arrived, not like a fall, but like a slow drift into the arms of something ancient and waiting. In the quiet of the Viking night, not everything that moved in the dark was welcome. The Norse believed that spirits walked freely under the moon. Some were harmless, ancestors visiting, land spirits keeping watch, but others, darker, wandered with heavier footsteps. Trolls, draga, things that belonged to the hidden realms, but sometimes slipped through. Every longhouse had its quiet rituals to keep them at bay, a sprig of ash, or rowan above the door, an iron nail near the hearth, a prayer whispered not to a god, but to the old ones who lived in the woods and stones. Trolls, it was said, hated fire and iron, so the last coals were stirred carefully, left glowing through the coldest hours. Doors were barred with heavy wood. Children were told to stay close to the center of the house, away from windows and doors. If strange dreams came, or a shadow passed across the far wall, it wasn't always ignored. Someone might wake, sit up, listen. Sometimes, it was just the wind, curling through trees, knocking gently on beams. But sometimes, it wasn't. And yet fear didn't rule the house. The people knew these spirits, just as they knew the snow, the animals, the fire. They had lived alongside them for generations. They didn't look for spirits, but they didn't pretend they weren't there. So sleep came with a kind of watchfulness, a trust in the fire, in the house, in the old ways. Outside, the woods whispered. Inside, the longhouse held its breath. And the night passed, as it always did, slowly, softly, safely. Even in the safety of thick walls and glowing firelight, someone always stayed awake, not always the same person, and not always fully. But in every Viking homestead, someone kept one eye open, one ear tuned to the silence, listening for the things the fire couldn't see. It might be a father, resting but alert, his hand near a blade, or a grandmother, eyes half closed, her senses sharper than they seemed. Sometimes, it was the family dog, shifting at the door, tail twitching in dreams, but waking at the faintest crack of twig outside. The world didn't pause while the village slept. The forest still moved, the night still carried wind, and wolves, and sometimes men. A guard didn't pace the floor or stand at attention. This was a different kind of watch, quieter, more instinctive, a soft shift in posture, a flicker of movement toward the door when the wind changed direction. If danger came, a bear nosing near the fence, or worse, raiders moving in the dark. The sleeper closest to the threshold would hear it first, rise first, signal quietly, and wake the rest if need be. But most nights passed without threat. The watchfulness was a habit, not a burden, a silent duty woven into life like spinning or carving. The knowledge that someone was listening, even half asleep, gave comfort, a barrier between the sleepers and the dark. So sleep came with safety, with trust, because even as dreams deepened and the fire dimmed, there was always one heartbeat just a little more awake than the others. Sleep in a Viking longhouse didn't come all at once. The night was slow, layered, filled with quiet duties that carried on even as the fire sank and voices faded. Someone always had something to tend. Perhaps it was the low grunt of a hungry piglet, restless in its pen, or a lamb born earlier that day, weak and needing warmth. A child would stir, or an elder would rise, moving slowly across the straw-covered floor, crouching with practiced hands. A bowl of water might be topped off, a handful of grain scattered, a gentle hush spoken into the dark to calm whatever had stirred. The fire, too, was a living thing, never fully left alone. A small log placed carefully, a breath blown over coals to awaken a flicker. The fire didn't blaze, it murmured, but it had to be fed. Tending the fire was more than keeping warm. It was about keeping time, keeping order, keeping the darkness just a little farther away. In the still hours before dawn, when the world outside was frozen in silence, the crack of a log settling, or the soft snort of a goat reminded the watchers that life was still moving. Slowly, but surely. These duties weren't seen as chores. They were acts of care, of stewardship, of being part of the rhythm that held the longhouse steady through the hours of night. And once they were done, once the animals were calm and the fire curled upward in soft orange light, the sleeper returned to their bed, the fur still warm, the straw still shaped to their body, and the night continued on. In the far north, winter nights didn't simply arrive, they lingered. Long after the fire was stoked and the household slept, the darkness held. There were times deep in the heart of winter when the sun wouldn't rise at all, only a dim silver glow along the horizon, like the memory of light. Then, once again, night returned, unbroken. To live through this kind of darkness was to know a world shaped by shadow. Time stretched, became soft around the edges. The line between night and day blurred, as if the sky had forgotten its rhythm. Inside the longhouse, life adjusted. Sleep came in cycles. People would rise, tend to a task, eat, speak a little, then return to their beds. There were no clocks to chase, only firelight, hunger, and instinct to guide them. Children played quietly in the half-light. Adults carved, mended, or told stories to pass the unchanging hours. And always, the fire burned, a steady center to hold the household in place while the sun rested. Outside, the snow deepened. Trees stood frozen in place, their branches thick with frost. The world beyond the door seemed paused, muffled under a silence so heavy it pressed into the walls. But inside, the longhouse lived, not loudly, not busily, but with breath, with warmth, with memory. Sleep came more often in these long nights, and dreams too stayed longer, as if they, like the sky, had nowhere else to go. And so the household moved through the darkness together, not rushing toward dawn, but resting in the deep, shared stillness of the endless night. Just as winter brought endless night, summer in the Viking world offered the opposite, nights that never truly darkened. As the solstice approached, the sun would dip low but never disappear. It hovered near the horizon, casting a golden glow that lingered well past midnight, as if the world had forgotten how to sleep. In this strange, quiet light, the sky turned pale lavender. Shadows stretched long across the ground, never quite fading. Birds sang late into the night. Even the trees seemed more awake, their leaves stirring in a breeze that felt more alive than usual. Inside the longhouse, people still slept, but differently. Windows were covered with skins or woven cloth to dim the light. Sleep came later and rose earlier. The rhythms of rest softened, became more fluid, like the sun itself. Some found these nights invigorating. They worked longer, traveled farther, sang louder around the fire. Others struggled to rest, tossing, turning, lulled not by darkness, but by weariness. Children sometimes resisted sleep altogether, too enchanted by the world still glowing outside. A parent would lie beside them, telling soft stories in the dim light, waiting for their eyes to finally grow heavy. Even dreams felt different in the midnight sun, brighter, lighter, less like journeys into shadow, and more like walks through golden mist. And still, the fire burned, though not for warmth but for tradition, a center, a glow within a glow. In these never-ending summer nights, the longhouse breathed slowly, carried not by silence or shadow, but by the quiet magic of a sky that simply refused to sleep. When the sky finally darkened, truly darkened, it opened like a great dome above the Viking world, scattered with stars that pulsed and shimmered like old firelight. The people of the north looked upward, not for wonder alone, but for guidance. The stars were maps, stories, watchers of the world below. In winter, when the nights stretched on for days, the sky became a second home. Sailors read it like scripture, farmers watched it for signs, children, lying beside the fire, learned the names of the constellations passed down through memory. They spoke of the wagon, what we call the Big Dipper, and saw it not as stars, but as a sacred chariot drawn across the sky. Orion's belt might be a god's sword. Other clusters formed animals, dragons, or fallen heroes. Some nights the sky was so clear that even the faintest stars appeared, pinpricks of light scattered across a sea of black velvet, moving slowly overhead while the earth lay still. There was no rush to name them all, no need to capture them. The stars were meant to be watched, remembered, trusted. And so after the evening meal, someone might slip outside, pull their cloak tighter, tilt their face to the sky and breathe deeply. Cold air, ancient stars, and a silence that felt full instead of empty. Back inside, the fire still glowed, but now the stars glowed too, held in the mind, drifting into dreams. Because in the Viking world, even the sky was part of the story. And then there were nights when the sky was not just dark, it was alive. The Vikings knew the northern lights well, dancing ribbons of green, sometimes edged in red or violet, unfurling across the heavens like silent fire. They didn't understand them as we do today, but they felt their meaning deeply. To them, this shimmering glow was sacred, a sign that the realms beyond were stirring, that something greater was passing overhead. Some believed the lights were the reflections of Valkyries, riding through the sky on swift horses, gathering fallen warriors from distant battlefields. Others said it was the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge between the world of humans and the gods, shimmering in the dark, always just out of reach. Children were told to stay quiet when the lights appeared, to watch in awe, but not to call out. The sky was listening. It was not the time for noise. The lights moved slowly, like breath, like the sea. At times they curved and pulsed like waves in reverse. At other times, they flickered in sudden bursts, and every eye would lift, every mouth fall silent. They seemed to come on the coldest nights, when the snow was still, and the stars sharp, when even the fire inside felt distant. And yet, the lights warmed something deeper, the soul perhaps. Inside the longhouse, when someone saw them, they might wake the others, not with urgency, but with wonder, just a whispered word, "Come," and then the door would open, and the family would step outside, just for a moment, wrapped in furs, standing on frozen ground, watching the sky become a story they would never forget. When the northern lights swept across the sky, glowing green and shifting like ocean waves above the trees, the Vikings did more than admire them, they gave them meaning. They did not see cold science in the aurora, they saw stories, warnings, blessings from beyond the mortal world. One belief held that the aurora was the glint of the Valkyries' armor, shining reflections of their silver helms as they flew across the heavens on horseback, seeking the worthy dead to carry to Valhalla. The flickering lights were not chance, they were movement, purpose, glory. Others said it was the Bifrost Bridge, the glowing path that connected Midgard, the human realm, to Asgard, home of the gods. When the lights were brightest, it meant the gods were watching, or walking among mortals in silence. Some feared the lights. They believed whistling at them might summon spirits, or invite bad luck. Children were warned not to point, not to speak too loudly beneath them. The sky, glowing like that, meant the veil between worlds was thin. Still others said the aurora was the breath of the ancestors, long dead kin exhaling into the night, their presence visible for just a moment. And so, each time the lights appeared, people paused, hushed, watched. They didn't need full explanations, only meaning, only myth, because in a world shaped by wind, fire, and stars, the aurora was something else entirely, a message written in the sky, just for those who remembered how to read it. When snow fell thick and steady, the world didn't just grow cold, it grew quiet. A Viking village under heavy snow was not lifeless, but still, like a held breath, like a song paused between verses. The longhouses stood buried to their knees in white, their roofs blanketed in silence. Smoke curled gently from the vents above, the only sign that life pulsed within. Footsteps were muffled, voices too. Even the animals moved differently, slower, more careful, as if respecting the hush that had settled over the land. Inside, the sound of crackling fire felt louder than usual. A cough, a shift beneath a fur blanket, the creak of an old beam. Each sound stretched wider in the silence, echoing softly through the still air. The snow outside absorbed everything, footsteps, words, wind. It thickened the night, deepened the dark, and yet, it brought a strange comfort. There was no need to go far. No boats could sail, no fields could be worked. People remained together, bound not by walls but by weather. Children peered through small windows at the pale white world, their breath fogging the glass. Adults moved slower, spoke softer, The days became a kind of dream, soft edges, slow motion. And when night fell again, which in winter came early and stayed long, the silence became total, not empty, not lonely, but complete. The kind of silence that asks nothing, that needs no answer. The kind of silence into which sleep arrives, not suddenly, but as gently as falling snow. Not every Viking night was spent in the warmth of a longhouse. Some were spent on the open sea, rocked by waves, wrapped in mist, cradled by the wooden hull of a ship cutting through dark waters. Sleep on a long ship was different, harder, but still possible, still necessary. The ship was narrow, lined with benches and shields, sails furled above like giant wings folded in rest. There was no room for privacy, no shelter from wind or spray, only cloaks, wool and furs, wrapped tightly around the body, pulled over the head when the cold crept in too sharply. Vikings took turns sleeping, while others kept watch, guiding the ship by starlight, feeling the sea's rhythm through the wood. Those who slept did so in short bursts, curled at the bottom of the boat, using a shield as a pillow, a bundled cloak as a blanket. The sound of the sea was constant, lapping, whispering, sometimes roaring. It became a lullaby of sorts. The boat rocked gently, then firmly, then gently again. Sleep came not from comfort, but from exhaustion, from trust, from the strange peace that settles over men who've surrendered to the sea. Above, stars shimmered. Sometimes the moon lit the sail in silver. Sometimes the sky was dark, and only the sound of breathing and water filled the night. And in that fragile sleep, broken but deep, dreams drifted through salt and spray, of home, of gods, of what lay ahead or behind, because even warriors need rest, even at sea. And so, beneath the weight of sky and sail, the ship carried not just men, but sleepers, dreamers, souls gently rocked by water and time, far from home, with the sea behind them and foreign shores beneath their boots. Viking warriors often made camp, not in safety, but in caution. Raiding didn't end at nightfall, it simply paused. And in that pause, men rested, but never fully. Their camps were simple, leather tents, or none at all. Just the earth, their shields, and each other. Fires burned low, more for light than warmth, hidden by rocks, shielded from distant eyes. They slept in groups, backs to one another, swords nearby, helmets within reach. A kind of sleep that listened, that never dropped fully into dreams, that held one foot in the waking world, just in case. The night sounds were different here, not the familiar crackle of a longhouse fire or the gentle stir of livestock, but wind through unknown trees, the creak of ships pulled up on shore, the distant cry of a bird not heard back home. Still, they found rest. Warriors were taught to, even on the ground, even in armor, even with one eye open. Some sang softly before sleep, short verses to Odin or to Ty, god of war and law. Others sharpened blades by firelight, the sound of stone on metal, as steady as the heartbeat. The air was colder on campaign, the stars unfamiliar, but the brotherhood was real, and in that closeness, there was a strange comfort. And so, with axes resting beside them, and shields forming walls around their fire, the raiders closed their eyes, if only for an hour, if only until the sky began to pale once more. Because even among warriors, the night was sacred, and sleep still came, quiet, alert, and ready to vanish with the first sound of danger. There is a special kind of silence that lives on the open sea at night, vast, endless, and deep. The kind of silence that swallows sound, stretches time, and leaves only the breath of wind and water. For Viking sailors crossing dark waters beneath unfamiliar stars, the night brought both awe and solitude. The boat creaked gently beneath them, its hull moving with the pulse of the ocean. The sail, furled or loose, whispered above, its fabric shifting with each breath of wind. There was no land in sight, only black waves and silver reflections. The stars overhead were sharp, like runes scratched into the sky. The moon, if it showed, turned the sea into molten metal, flickering with movement. Some men stayed awake, taking turns at the rudder or watching the horizon. Others lay back on the wooden planks, wrapped in cloaks, their eyes half closed, letting the rhythm of the waves guide them into sleep. It was a restless sleep, but a real one. The ocean itself was a cradle, a cold, vast one, but steady, ancient, and alive. Dreams on the sea felt different. They came like mist, slow and strange. Sometimes of home, sometimes of monsters below, sometimes just of wind and water and endless travel. Even the bravest felt small beneath that sky, but it wasn't fear that held them, it was humility, a quiet understanding that they were part of something greater, something old, something deep. And so beneath the stars, surrounded by dark water on every side, the Vikings slept, not fully, not long, but enough. Because the sea allows it, briefly, when it's calm, while most slept on land or sea, in longhouse or tent. Someone always remained awake. The sentry. Their task was simple, but vital, to watch, to listen, to hold the edge of wakefulness, so that others could surrender to sleep. Sentries didn't pace, unless danger was near. They sat or stood quietly, their eyes scanning the darkness, their ears tuned to every creak, rustle, or distant sound. Sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, but always alert. The night around them moved slowly. Firelight flickered low. Wind rustled through grass or rigging. Animals stirred softly in their pens. Sometimes there was nothing but the sound of their own breath. The cold bit harder when one couldn't sleep. So sentries wrapped themselves tightly, in wool, in fur, in silence. They shifted their weight slowly, careful not to disturb the hush. Often, they whispered to the gods, quiet prayers to Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, who never slept, or to Thor, for strength, or to spirits of the land, asking for peace. Some carried a horn, ready to sound the alarm. Others simply kept a hand on their weapon, fingers brushing the hilt like a silent promise. Time passed differently in the watch. It didn't move with the stars or fire. It moved with breath, with stillness, with the slow confidence that morning would come, and their watch would end. And when their time was done, they lay down with a kind of earned peace, knowing they had guarded the gate between sleep and danger, between dream and the world. For a Viking warrior, a sword was more than a weapon. It was part of the self, a trusted companion, a protector, a symbol of honor. And so, even in sleep, it stayed close. Many warriors slept with their swords by their side. Some wrapped the leather grip in cloth, laying it gently beneath their head like a pillow. Others kept it within arm's reach, tucked beneath a fur or cloak, always ready, always near. It wasn't about fear, it was about readiness. The world could change in an instant. A raid, a shout, a shadow moving across the wall. A warrior needed to be ready before the mind fully woke. Axes, too, lay close, daggers beneath blankets, shields stacked nearby, leaned against the wall like silent guards. This was especially true in foreign lands, on campaign, in strange villages, on the sea. Sleep was lighter in those places, more watchful, muscles half tensed even in dreams. Some believed that laying with a blade nearby brought strength into sleep, that it kept the spirit anchored, protected from ill dreams or wandering ghosts. Others did it out of pure habit, the blade's weight a familiar presence, as comforting as a cloak. The iron smelled faintly of ash and salt. The leather was warm where the hand last held it. It was not cold, not dangerous, it was trusted, part of the rhythm of life and night. And so beneath starlight or roof beams, in tents or longhouses, the warriors of the north lay down, not defenseless, not afraid, but with steel beside them, sleeping not in peace, but in readiness, as they always had, as they always would. In the depths of a Viking night, with frost on the beams and silence thick as fur, dreams didn't always come gently. Some were cold, not just in feeling, but in tone. Dreams of snow-covered graves, ships vanishing into mist, ravens circling above empty halls. These were not nightmares in the modern sense. They were messages, warnings, whispers from the far edges of fate. The Norse believed dreams could be prophetic, sent by gods, spirits, or the threads of destiny themselves. To dream of ice cracking beneath your feet could mean betrayal. To see a wolf in shadow might speak of danger, or power, or a trial yet to come. Those gifted with Sidra, the sight, could read these visions more clearly, but even common folk knew when a dream meant more than it seemed. They spoke of them in the morning, low-voiced, near the fire, asking what it could mean, what signs to look for. Some dreams were dismissed, others were remembered for years, etched into memory like carvings in wood. The cold seemed to bring such visions more often, perhaps because the body slept deeper in winter, or because the veil between worlds thinned in the stillest, frostiest hours. Sometimes a person would wake with frost in their breath and eyes wide open, not with fear, but with knowledge, a name they had forgotten, a face they had never seen, a feeling that something, somewhere, had shifted. And in those moments, they didn't reach for reason, they reached for meaning. Because in the Viking world, a dream was not just a story, it was a thread in the tapestry of fate, and sometimes it came on the coldest night of all. To the Vikings, death was not an end, it was a passage, and like sleep, it came with ritual, silence, and reverence. The dead were not feared, they were honored, and when someone passed, their body was treated not as a lifeless thing, but as a traveler, preparing for one final, eternal sleep. The body was washed gently, wrapped in fine cloth or furs, and laid out with care, sometimes in a wooden chamber within a mound of earth, sometimes aboard a boat, their arms crossed, eyes closed, as if already dreaming. Objects were placed beside them, weapons, jewelry, tools, anything they might need in the afterlife. Sometimes food, sometimes drink, sometimes even a beloved animal, sacrificed to accompany them. The grave was not just a resting place, it was a bed, carefully made, a final sleep beneath soil or sky. Those left behind did not wail, not always, they sang, spoke stories of the life that was, whispered blessings, called on the gods to receive the soul with honor. In some places, a stone ship, an outline of large stones, was built on land, shaped like a vessel for the soul to sail into the other world, because the journey never truly ended, it simply changed course. And so, in the Viking way, the dead were not lost, they were sleeping, sleeping beneath hills, beneath stars, beneath the ever-turning sky. And those who still lived, who still slept in the longhouse, knew that one day they too would lie down, sword at their side, dreams waiting, fire fading, and drift into that long final night, peaceful, prepared, never alone. In the Norse imagination, the afterlife was not cold or silent. It was a hall, a feast, a place of song, of firelight, of unending company. For warriors, the greatest reward after death was to reach Valhalla, the hall of the slain, where they would be welcomed by Odin himself. But it was not a place of rest in the usual sense. It was a place of purpose, imagine a hall so vast, its roof was made of shields, spears lined its beams, and the golden light inside never faded. This was Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, and for many Vikings, it was the ultimate dream, the ideal end to a life well lived. They imagined it clearly. At the center of Valhalla stood long, carved tables stretching into shadow. Warriors from all over Midgard gathered there, men and women who had fallen in battle, now risen in glory. Their laughter echoed like thunder, their voices filled the space like storm winds. The fire in the middle roared with endless fuel. It gave off no smoke, only light. It warmed without burning. Its glow reflected off polished axes and silver cups, raised in constant toasts. A great boar, say Hirimnir, was cooked anew each evening, its meat never ending, its taste divine. A goat named Hydrun stood upon the roof, and from her udders flowed mead, sweet, golden, and forever full. Each night, feasting. Each morning, combat. Not for blood, but for honor. The slain rose again before dusk, whole and laughing, ready for more. Valhalla was not peaceful, but it was joyful, purposeful, filled with the thunder of comradeship and the music of eternal belonging. Sleep, in this place, was rare, but if it came, it would be deep, a rest free of fear, held in the arms of gods, beneath a sky that never dimmed. And for those in the longhouses back on earth, lying beneath furs, sword at side, they sometimes dreamed of this hall, the warmth, the food, the laughter, the place where all nights were good and none ever ended. As the fire dimmed and the longhouse slipped into shadow, the Norse mind wandered to the beings that stirred when human eyes closed. Creatures of the dark, of the deep earth, of the woods just beyond reach. The Vikings believed the world was alive with unseen folk, elves, dwarves, and other night beings who walked in silence, who watched, who sometimes helped, and sometimes hindered. Elves, or Alfar, were not always gentle. They were powerful, mysterious, radiant. Some lived in hills, others in the air. Offerings were left for them, bits of food or sweet herbs to win their favor, or at least their neutrality. A house blessed by elves prospered. A house offended might fall into strange misfortunes. Dwarves were different. Deep dwellers, craftsmen of stone and metal, they forged weapons for gods, rings of power, and things mortals were not meant to touch. Rarely seen, always feared a little. It was said they hated sunlight, that it turned them to stone, and so they worked only by night, which made the darkness a time of wonder and danger both. Other creatures, less defined, moved in the night too. Trolls, Huldra. In the Viking world, not all sleep was peaceful. Nightmares came like shadows, heavy, pressing, strange, and the people of the north had ways to meet them. They believed that some dreams were not just fears from within, but visitations from without. Spirits, memories, or even curses could slip into the mind during sleep. The mare, for example, a dark, suffocating presence, was said to sit on the chest of the sleeper, stealing breath, planting troubling visions. To guard against such visitations, the Norse used symbols and rituals. Iron was trusted, a small knife placed near the bed, or a nail beneath the straw. Iron cut through shadow. Rings carved with runes might be worn during sleep. Words for protection, for peace, for silence in the dark. Charms of herb and bone were tied with string and hung above sleeping places. Rowan wood was common, believed to keep spirits at bay. Birch too, and sometimes elder. Stories were another defense. A tale told before sleep could shake the dream, could keep the dark out, could bring order to the mind before the spirit wandered. And if a nightmare did come, if someone woke with sweat and wide eyes, they would speak of it, not hide it. In the morning, beside the fire, the dream would be told, shared, transformed into meaning. Because to face a nightmare was not to be weak, it was to be human. And in their longhouses, in their beds of straw and fur, with gods above and fire beside, the Vikings knew. Even when sleep turned strange, they were never alone. Not every night in the Viking world was calm. Some arrived with wind that howled through the cracks in the wood, or with distant howls that were not wind at all. Storms came without warning, sudden gusts that shook the longhouse walls, rattled the beams, sent snow and ice slamming against the roof. The fire hissed when wind found its way down the smoke hole. People pulled furs tighter, pressed closer, silent beneath the roar of the world outside. Children looked to their mothers, wide-eyed. Elders muttered quiet words, prayers, protection, memory. The night had changed. The sky was angry. In the wild, wolves roamed. Their howls echoed across frozen fields, not just once, but in answer to each other, a language of hunger and distance. The Vikings didn't romanticize wolves. They respected them, feared them, understood them. Sometimes the animals grew bold in winter, creeping close to fences, sniffing at the edges of human warmth. Dogs growled in the night, alert but silent, the only warning before a shape passed beyond the firelight. And yet, even in these nights the longhouse held. It was built for such things, not just from wood and sod, but from story and habit, from family and faith. The people knew what to do, how to move quietly, how to wait. The storm would pass, the wolves would move on. Sleep returned slowly, but it came, wrapped in the fading thunder of the wind, in the hush after howling, in the warmth of survival. Because even when the night growled and clawed, the Vikings lay beneath fur and timber and memory, and endured, as they always had. Not all Viking nights were meant for rest. Some pulsed with rhythm, with chanting, with the deep heartbeat of drums echoing through the trees and across the frozen ground. These were ceremonial nights, nights of ritual, of offerings, of calling to the gods. The drum was sacred, its skin stretched tight over bone or wood, struck in slow, steady beats, one after another. Not fast, not loud, but deep, felt in the chest, felt in the earth. The sound guided the spirit, helped it rise, helped it fall. It marked the movement of time in a world where night could stretch endlessly. Around the fire, people gathered in cloaks and shadow. They sang, low voices, often in unison, carried words older than memory. Words meant not for each other, but for the sky, for the gods, for the things unseen. Sometimes the drums were part of Sidra, a ritual of vision. A woman, a Völva, would sit in the center, eyes closed, swaying to the beat. She spoke in strange tones, as if someone else had borrowed her tongue. She reached into the other world, seeking answers or warnings. Children watched in silence, wide-eyed, unsure whether they were witnessing magic or dream. And after the drums stopped, the silence felt heavier, sacred, not a silence to break with words, but to let settle like snow. Later, when the longhouse returned to rest, the rhythm of the drums still echoed in the bones, a steady thrum, slow and eternal, like the sound of the world turning in the dark. Even in sleep, it remained, a memory of fire, of gods, of a people in step with something greater than themselves. Some Viking nights were more than rest, more than ritual. They were celebration, marked by bonfires, so large they turned night to gold, and voices raised in joy beneath the stars. Seasonal festivals were sacred, woven into the cycles of the land. Solstice, harvest, the start of Yule. These were nights when the whole village gathered, the fire built high at the center, casting dancing shadows on snow and smiles alike. The bonfire cracked and roared, fed by logs as thick as a man's arm. Sparks flew upward into the sky like stars reborn, joining the heavens for a moment before fading. Around the fire, songs rose, rhythmic, ancient, joyful. Some were slow and haunting, others quick and loud. Everyone joined in. Even the quietest voices found courage in the firelight. Children danced in circles, elders clapped hands. Horns of mead were passed, warm against the winter air, sweet with honey and memory. It wasn't just joy, it was thanks. Thanks for light in the dark, for warmth in the cold, for life carried one more season forward. Sometimes, animal sacrifices were made, their spirits honored and released with care. Offerings of grain or carved wood were cast into the fire, their smoke rising like messages. And when the flames began to die, people carried the light back with them, in glowing coals, in lanterns, in their hearts. That night, sleep came easily. It came to music, to the smell of smoke on skin, to laughter still echoing in the air. Because for one night, darkness had been chased away, and in its place, fire, food, and the feeling of being part of something greater. Some Viking nights were filled with stillness of another kind, not peace, but anticipation. The night before battle, sleep came slowly, if at all. Warriors lay close together, not for warmth but for presence. A shield brother beside you was more comfort than any fire. The stars above looked sharper, the wind colder, the ground more real beneath your back. There were no songs this night, only murmurs, silent prayers whispered into cloaks, quiet words to the gods, to Odin, for wisdom, to Thor, for strength, to Tyr, for justice. Hands reached for amulets, for carved runes tucked beneath tunics, not to ask for victory, but for meaning. Some sharpened blades again, though they'd done it twice already. Others sat with heads bowed, eyes closed, not yet sleeping, not yet dreaming, just listening. The world felt closer before battle, the sky pressing down, the ground holding breath. Every sound mattered, the crack of a twig, the hiss of wind, the far-off call of a night bird. Elders remembered this feeling, youth met it for the first time, and yet, even then, even in that tense stillness, the longhouse mind endured. Someone told a soft story, someone passed a horn of mead, just once. Someone laughed, low, tired, real. Eventually, some did sleep, wrapped in cloaks, fingers on hilts, dreaming not of death, but of home, of firelight, of the path that led them here. Because in the Viking soul, the fear of battle was not weakness, it was part of the story, a chapter waiting to be written. And the night before it came, the world held them close, in silence, in memory, in the rhythm of breath beside breath. One day, every warrior, every farmer, every elder would take the last sleep. And when that time came, the Vikings met it, not with panic, but with preparation, with care, with memory. Death was not feared, it was known. And when it came like nightfall, slow or sudden, but never unexpected. The body was treated with reverence, eyes closed gently, arms crossed, washed, then wrapped in cloth or fur, as though being tucked in, ready to sleep beneath the sky forever. The last bed could be a burial mound, raised with stone and soil, or it could be a ship, pushed out to sea, or burned in a final blaze of flame and smoke. Not an end, a journey, a sending off. Inside the grave, objects were placed with care, a sword for defense, a comb for dignity, bread for the road, mead for the thirst, tokens of love from those left behind. It was said the dead should not travel empty-handed. Around the resting place, loved ones gathered. They did not cry in chaos. They spoke, remembered, They told stories, not of how the person died, but how they lived, who they protected, what they built, what they loved. Sometimes a song was sung, a slow chant, a call to the gods, take them home. And as the soil was piled or the flames rose higher, the world held still. Time seemed to stop, because one of their own had gone to sleep, not in a bed of straw, but in a cradle of earth and fire, carried not by dreams, but by memory. And in that sleep, that last long sleep, they joined the ancestors, watching, waiting, dreaming in the stars. So now we ask, could you sleep in a Viking night? Not in a soft bed, not behind a locked door, not with the hum of modern machines, but in a longhouse, beneath beams darkened by smoke, wrapped in furs that smell of earth and ash, breathing the same air as the fire, the animals, and the ones you love. Could you fall asleep knowing wolves howled outside, and spirits might pass unseen just beyond the walls? Would the creak of the roof comfort you, or keep your eyes wide? Could you rest, shoulder to shoulder with others? No walls, no rooms, only the shared rhythm of sleep. Could you drift into dreams guided by story, protected by runes, warmed by a hearth that never truly went out? You might miss your pillow, your solitude, the hum of distant electricity, but you would find something else. The silence, the closeness, the hum of a world that still listened, that still remembered the sky, the gods, the stories. In the Viking night, sleep wasn't just rest, it was return to rhythm, to breath, to the deep, ancient pulse of human life. So close your eyes now. Imagine the fire fading, the fur pulled tighter around your shoulders, the slow, steady breathing beside you. You are safe, you are watched, you are part of the night, and the longhouse dreams with you. Before the fire faded, before dreams fully took hold, the night arrived first through the nose. The smell of a Viking night was thick, layered, unforgettable. Wood smoke, first and always. It clung to everything, hair, cloth, fur. It wrapped itself around every sleeper like a memory. It was more than scent. It was safety, warmth, a signal that the hearth still breathed. Then came the furs, sheep, deer, bear. Their scent was earthy, animal, old, not unpleasant, but rich with the lives they once lived. The warmth they now gave. Every fur had its own story. A mountain climbed, a forest crossed. Underneath all that, the cold, it had its own smell too. Sharp, clean, the scent of snow just fallen, of air that hadn't touched fire in hours. It crept in through the roof's seams and stone cracks. It met the smoke halfway, mingled with it, danced with it in the longhouse air. Sometimes there was the faint scent of animals sleeping in their stalls. Straw, wool, warm breath, the living smell of life beside life. And, faintly, something sweet. Mead left in a cup, a berry crushed underfoot, pine sap on the wall beam. Each smell was a thread in the fabric of night. None stood alone. Together, they wove a blanket over the senses, grounding, comforting, ancient. To fall asleep in a Viking longhouse was to drift into a world of scent, deeper than sight, older than sound. And with every breath, you carried the night within you. Long before dreams arrived, the Viking world spoke through texture. Sleep didn't begin with silence, it began with touch. Rough wool, woven by hand, heavy and thick. It scratched a little, but it held heat like a promise. Blankets stitched from coarse yarn, patched over years, passed between hands and generations. Beneath that, the hides, leather worn smooth from use. Not soft like velvet, but alive with memory. You could feel the history in every crease, every ridge. Cowhide, deerskin, sometimes sheepskin, with its curling wool still clinging tight. And at the core of it all, linen, used for underclothes, head wraps, thin sheets when they could be spared. Softer than wool, gentler than leather, cool to the touch at first, warming slowly with the body. Linen wrapped around wrists, over shoulders, beneath heads, the quiet comfort of simplicity. Even the straw mattered. Laid beneath bedding, it shifted with weight, gave way gently. Its edges sometimes poked through, reminding the sleeper of earth, of harvest, of the cycle that never stopped. Bare skin met all these textures as night fell, layered, imperfect, grounding. There were no silk sheets, no smooth mattresses, but there was something older, something real. To sleep in a Viking home was to be held by the work of hands, woven, stitched, tanned, and laid down with care. And as the body settled, the textures faded, not gone, but softened. letting the spirit drift upward, while the skin remembered where it came from. When the fire burned low and the longhouse slipped into hush, there were some nights when sleep waited just a little longer, because someone would speak. Not loudly, not all at once, but with a voice low and steady, and eyes fixed on the glowing coals. A ghost story. The Vikings didn't tell these to frighten children, though children listened. They told them because they believed in spirits, in curses, in things that walked when they should have stayed still. A drowned sailor whose boots thudded on deck long after the ship returned. A woman who froze in the woods, now seen drifting through the mist at first light. A burial mound that groaned at night, its sleeper restless beneath the earth. These stories were told with care, not screamed, not twisted, just passed along. Memory wrapped in shadow. The fire flickered with every word, faces lit and vanished. Someone shifted beneath their furs, someone else watched the door. It wasn't fear that settled on the room. It was awareness that the world was bigger than it looked, that not everything seen could be explained, and not everything gone was truly gone. When the story ended, no one laughed, no one spoke. The embers cracked, the smoke curled, and sleep, when it finally came, did so slowly, with a new weight, with one eye half open, not from terror, but from reverence, for what the night might still be holding. Even far inland, even tucked beneath furs and straw, many Viking sleepers still heard the sea. Not in the wind, not in the trees, but in their dreams. The rhythm of rowing lived in their bones. The long pull of the oar, the splash of water against wood, the creak of the hull as it flexed beneath steady arms. Over and over, oar, water, breath, a heartbeat that never left them. Fishermen, traders, raiders, all had touched the sea. And at night, when their bodies lay still, the motion returned. In dreams, they stood again on the deck of a longship, the sail above them billowing like a sky made of cloth, salt in the air, cold on the face, the horizon wide and waiting. The sea was a part of them. It carried them to new lands. It took some and never gave them back, but in dreams, it always welcomed them home. Some said that if you listened closely to a sleeping sailor, you could hear them murmur, counting strokes, calling quietly to shipmates long gone. Children dreamed of boats before they ever boarded one, of waves that rose like mountains, of islands that appeared like ghosts in the fog, and those who had never gone to sea dreamed they did. Because in the Viking world, the sea wasn't just a place, it was a memory, passed from breath to breath, oar to oar. And at night, when the fire was low and the wind was calm, it came back, gentle and vast, rocking every sleeper on waves made of dream. Not all longhouses were the same. Some were taller, wider, carved with dragon heads, and filled with treasures. These belonged to the jarls, chieftains, lords, rulers of land and sea. And though the fire still burned in the center, though the furs and straw were much the same, sleep came differently in the jarl's hall. It came with weight. Here, men slept with gold on their arms, with names whispered beyond the village, with warriors at their feet and servants at their side. The jarl might lie near the raised hearth, on a platform draped with fine skins, bear, wolf, silver grey and heavy. Weapons lay close but polished, ceremonial. His cloak, trimmed with rare fur, wrapped him like a banner. But sleep, even for the powerful, was not always deep. The hall was quieter, voices hushed, watchmen stood just beyond the door, and in that silence lived responsibility, for land, for people, for peace. Those who slept nearby, trusted guards, bloodkin, did so lightly, not in fear but in readiness, for a jarl's rest could be broken at any time by a message, a threat, a vision, and yet there was comfort in that space. The roof high, the beams carved with history, shields hung like quiet sentinels, the smell of roasted meat still lingering from a feast. The jarl slept as the village slept, not above it, but for it, because power did not shield against the cold, or silence, or dreams. There was one night that stood apart from all others, longer, darker, older than memory, the winter solstice, the night when the sun seemed to vanish, when the world held its breath, and the line between life and shadow thinned to a whisper. In the Viking world, this night was sacred. The fire in the longhouse was not allowed to die. It was fed carefully, log by log through every hour of darkness. It became more than warmth. It became a guardian, a sun inside the home, when the real sun refused to rise. Families stayed close, no one wandered far. Meals were simple, but shared with meaning. Children were told stories, not just to pass time, but to remind them that the light would return. Outside, the snow was deep, the stars hung heavy, the trees stood frozen like ancient sentinels. Inside, charms were hung from rafters, evergreen branches, carved runes, talismans of bone and metal, symbols of endurance, of life held through the cold. Some spoke to the gods that night, quiet invocations to Odin, to Frigg, to the unseen forces that watched over hearth and home. Others simply sat in silence, letting the firelight flicker across their eyes, their hands, their thoughts. And when sleep finally came, late, slow, hesitant, it came not from tiredness, but from trust. Trust that the night would end, that the sun would return, that the fire, fed and guarded, would still be burning in the morning. A promise held in flame. Amid the smoke, the cold, the sound of animals shifting in the dark, there was also love. Not loud, not grand, but quiet, constant, real. In the longhouse, privacy was rare, but love found space anyway. In the warmth shared between two bodies, beneath the weight of fur, beside the flicker of fire, a hand reaching for another in the dark, a whispered word between breaths, a shared cloak, a shared dream. Lovers in the Viking world did not need rooms of their own. They had corners, blankets, eyes that spoke what voices could not. Marriage was often practical. Families joined, lands united, but affection grew slowly, like moss on stone, not rushed, not forced, just there. Sometimes it was laughter during chores. Sometimes it was silence after a long day. Sometimes it was sleep, back to back, breathing the same air, warmed by the same fire. Even in the deepest winter, even with warriors near and children close, there was room for intimacy, for trust, for the kind of love that didn't need to be seen, only felt. And in that closeness, sleep came gently, not just from tiredness, but from connection. Because in the longhouse, where the world narrowed to firelight and fur, love was a fire of its own, soft, steady, sacred. In a world without walls, silence became its own kind of language. In the Viking longhouse, where voices echoed and every sound was shared, people learned to speak without speaking. At night, words grew fewer. The crackle of fire took their place. A nod across the room meant, "I see you." A shift in bedding, "I'm still here." The rhythm of breathing, shared among many, became the night's true conversation. Sometimes, silence meant comfort. Nothing more needed to be said. A child curled against a parent, the fur pulled tighter, and that was enough. Other times, silence held things heavier. Grief not spoken, fear not named, memories held close to the chest. But even then, others understood. There was a respect for what went unspoken. A warrior might stare into the fire for hours, lost in thought. No one disturbed him. A mother might braid her child's hair before sleep, lips closed, hands steady. A prayer said silently was no less heard. The Vikings were storytellers, singers, poets, but they also knew the weight of quiet. They knew that silence could heal, could protect, could offer peace, that words might shatter. And as the night deepened, that silence wrapped itself around the sleepers like another blanket. It filled the gaps between fur and straw, fire and breath. Not empty, just full of everything that didn't need to be said. Some nights, even in the hush of a Viking longhouse, sleep did not arrive. The fire glowed low, the animals were still, the breath of others rose and fell with perfect rhythm. But for one soul, the mind would not rest. There was no name for insomnia then, no word for sleeplessness that stretched into hours, but they knew it, felt it, carried it. A warrior, staring at the ceiling beams, thinking of a face lost in battle. A mother, counting the soft breaths of her children, afraid of what tomorrow might take. An elder remembering a promise they never kept. The world was quiet, but the thoughts were not, and so they rose, wrapped a cloak around their shoulders, stirred the coals just enough for a little light, sat near the hearth, alone in the vast hush of the night. They might carve softly into wood, or whisper a prayer to a forgotten god, or simply sit, eyes half closed, watching the embers shift and settle. Sometimes they listened to the wind, to the creak of the beams, to the language of the house itself. And when they finally lay back down, if they did, they carried a stillness with them, not peace, always, but something close. Because even when sleep did not come, the night still held them, patient, silent, waiting. Eventually, even the longest night ends, and when it does not rush. The first light in a Viking longhouse came not from the sky, but from the ash, a soft red glow still pulsing in the heart of the hearth, barely holding on. Above it, the roof vents exhaled thin trails of smoke into a sky just beginning to pale. No sun yet, only the gentle fading of stars, the first whisper of day. Frost clung to everything, to the beams, the blankets, the edges of sleeping breath. Even inside, the cold made itself known, soft and silver on the tips of furs and fingers. Sleepers stirred slowly. Someone shifted beneath a hide. A child mumbled in their dreams. A dog stretched, paws thudding lightly on the floor. The hearthkeeper, or whoever rose first, leaned close to the ash. A breath, a spark, a small branch laid gently, and the flame returned, as if it had only been waiting. The longhouse was still dim, but it was waking, quietly, patiently. Boots were found, water was poured, the smell of smoke deepened, and through the thin seams in the wall, the light of dawn finally reached the floor. Not loud, not sudden, just there, a new beginning, wrapped in frost and fire, slipping softly into a house full of stories, dreams and breath. The night had ended, and it had left behind silence, warmth, and the promise of one more day. Long before the others stirred, before voices filled the air, or feet touched the cold floor, one figure moved first. The hearthkeeper, often the mother, sometimes the eldest daughter, occasionally an elder too old for farm work, but never too old for fire. Their task was simple, sacred, to wake the day by waking the flame. The hearth was the heart of the home, and without it, the longhouse stayed frozen. The warmth came not from outside, but from the coals still smouldering under ash, the quiet embers of the night before. Kneeling low, the hearthkeeper stirred gently, not rushed, not careless. She knew the sounds, the soft collapse of coal, the small hiss of damp wood. She added dry kindling, a breath or two, her hands steady from years of repetition. Then came flame, slowly, like a blessing. The smoke rose straight and thin. The room brightened, shadows returned to their corners. Around her, the house began to move, one by one, a cough, a stretch, a child asking for water. But for a moment, it was only her and the fire. In those few minutes, she was the bearer of light, the one who turned night into morning, ash into heat, silence into life. No one thanked her aloud. It was tradition, it was known. And when the fire caught fully, dancing once more across the iron pot, she stood, wiped her hands, and blended again into the rhythm of the waking home. But the flame, the day, had begun with her. Not all dreams were made of memory or fear. Some came wrapped in silence, with shadows shaped like symbols, and voices not quite human. And when a Viking spoke of such a dream, they said, "Odin came to me." These weren't just dreams, they were visitations, warnings, gifts. Odin, the All-Father, seeker of wisdom, god of war and poetry, wearer of many faces. He moved not just through the skies, but through minds, through dreams. In sleep, he might appear as an old man in a cloak, standing beneath a great tree, or as a raven, perched on the edge of vision, or as nothing more than a whisper, a riddle left behind when the dreamer woke. Those who dreamed of Odin often did not speak of it immediately. They rose with eyes wide, quiet, changed. They sat near the fire longer. Their thoughts moved deeper. Some were given knowledge. Some were shown faces. Some saw a path ahead that others could not. And while the dream faded, as dreams do, the feeling did not. To dream of Odin was not something to boast about. It was something to carry, carefully, like a blade unsheathed, like a flame in the hand. Others in the house would notice. A glance exchanged, a nod of understanding. No need to ask what had been seen. The gods chose when to speak and to whom. And in that ancient sleep, where firelight faded and breath slowed, sometimes, just sometimes, the one-eyed god walked softly between dreams. Before dreams arrived, before the fire dimmed, there was the blanket. Not light, not soft, in the way we know softness, but heavy, anchoring, real, wool woven thick by hand, sometimes coarse, sometimes edged in fur. It didn't float, It settled, draped over the body, like a shield, like a memory. In a Viking longhouse, sleep came through layers, straw beneath, cloak around, wool above, and that wool mattered. It stilled the limbs, slowed the breath, told the mind, you are safe. Its weight reminded the sleeper of the day, of the sheep that had worn the wool first, of the hands that spun the thread, of the loom where it was stretched and bound. And in that blanket, beneath its gentle pressure, the night deepened, thoughts stopped drifting, fears slowed. The warmth beneath became a pocket of stillness in a world of shifting cold. Children felt it most, their small forms wrapped tightly, the wool holding them like arms that never let go. Even warriors relaxed beneath it, swords nearby, minds sharpened, but bodies softened under that steady weight. It wasn't luxury, it was trust, it was presence, it was peace. And when the fire burned low and the night pressed close, it was the blanket, not the walls, that held the sleeper still. Not silence, not prayer, just wool, just warmth, just enough. Sometimes the longhouse wasn't home for the night. Sometimes sleep came beside a fjord, still and black beneath a sky of stars, the land rising steep around it, carved by ancient ice and time. The Vikings knew these waters, deep, narrow, silent. At night the fjord was a mirror, reflecting firelight from the shore, the breath of the moon, and the sails of longships pulled up to rest. On these shores, wrapped in cloaks and beside shallow fires, travelers found a different kind of sleep. The world felt closer, wilder, the trees darker, the wind louder, but the water was always calm. Its lapping against rock was the lullaby, slow, even, timeless. Some slept aboard the boats, curled between oars, head resting on sacks of grain or coiled rope. Others lay on mossy ground, rocks beneath hides, breath rising in clouds, no roof, just stars, no walls, just hills, and the scent, salt, pine, ash, mixed into something ancient, something unchanged. Those who lived inland rarely knew this kind of night, but those who did never forgot it. It taught them to sleep with one eye on the sky, with one hand on the earth, with the sea beside them like a quiet guardian. And when they woke, if they woke before dawn, the fjord was still there, watching, holding their dreams in its glass-black surface, quiet as a god. As the fire burned low and voices softened to murmurs, there came a quiet moment, small, sacred, steady. The last cup of mead. It wasn't a toast, not a celebration, just a ritual, a way to end the day with warmth in the chest and a memory on the tongue. The mead was sweeter at night, not because of honey or herbs, but because of stillness, because of the way the light flickered on the rim of the cup, because of the way hands cradled it like something delicate, needed, shared between family, between friends, between warriors with weary shoulders, sometimes passed from person to person. One last taste each before the flames died out completely. A quiet thank you, to the gods, to each other, to the fire, to the day. No one drank deeply, just enough. Sometimes, a few drops were poured into the fire, a small offering, a farewell. The flames flared briefly, as if nodding in return, and then the cup was placed down, empty. Sleep soon followed, carried not just by tiredness, but by the gentle burn of mead still lingering at the back of the throat, a final warmth, a soft farewell to wakefulness. And in that small act, repeated night after night, the people of the north found peace, not from what was said, but from what was shared. There were nights when even the fire gave up, when the wind howled through every crack in the walls, when the breath of sleepers turned to mist, when frost crept along the inside of the longhouse beams like a ghost in slow motion. These were the coldest nights, nights when the fire, no matter how carefully tended, seemed too small, too soft, a single light against an entire season. And yet, they endured, not with more wood. Sometimes there was none, not with thicker blankets. They had only what they had. They survived with closeness. Families lay tighter, shoulder to shoulder, back to back. Children pressed between parents. The young held the old. Even dogs curled into laps and crooks of arms. Warmth became shared, not owned. Clothing stayed on. Wool tunics beneath cloaks, socks wrapped in hide, hats pulled low. Sometimes even gloves were worn in sleep. The air inside the longhouse didn't warm, but bodies did. Slowly, together. The fire crackled less, silence reigned, and no one moved more than they had to. And in that stillness, they waited for dawn, for the frost to release its grip, for the wind to wander somewhere else. And when morning came, and it always did, the first to rise found not smoke, but ice on the coals, and still life. Because warmth wasn't always a flame. Sometimes it was just the will to wake again. Even in the strongest longhouse, wrapped in warmth and story, nightmares found their way in, and when they did, it was often a child who stirred first. A whimper in the dark, a small hand gripping a woolen blanket, eyes wide, unblinking, searching the shadows for shapes that didn't belong. A nightmare, not of monsters perhaps, but of being lost in the snow, of wolves, of darkness without fire, of voices that called but did not comfort. The adults didn't panic. They didn't hush with fear or shame the child for waking. They listened, always. A mother or father would pull the child close, whisper old words, not just comforting, but powerful. Sometimes a short chant, sometimes a prayer to Frigg, the goddess of home and protection. A carved charm might be pressed into a small palm. A braid of elder twigs hung above the bed might be turned 3 times. And then, the voice, telling a new story, softer than before. A true one, maybe, about the day the child was born, about a bird seen in spring, about a quiet God who walked in the snow and never let the fire die. No grand endings, just calm, until the child's breath slowed again, until their body softened, until sleep, safer, deeper, returned. Because nightmares were part of childhood, but so was safety, and in the Viking world, both had their place, and both were answered. Not every sleep in the longhouse was uninterrupted. Some belonged to those who lived between wakefulness and duty, to those who might be roused at any hour by a cry, by a knock, by the hush of urgency in someone's breath. The midwife. She did not sleep like the others, not truly. Her body lay still, but her mind listened, always to the silence, to the rhythm of the house, to the shift of footsteps in the night. She had delivered many of those now breathing softly beside her, some still infants, some now mothers themselves. Birth did not follow the sun. It came when it came, deep in the dark, in the coldest hours, with no warning but a hand on the shoulder and eyes wide with pain and fear. And when it came, she rose. Her tools were simple, cloths, herbs, hands, knowledge older than story. She moved like water, spoke softly, gave strength where there was none, pulled new life from the edge of silence. But on quiet nights, rare nights, she slept. Not deeply, not long, but enough. Wrapped in her own cloak, head near the fire, heart still turned outward. She knew that sleep was precious, but so was readiness. And so she rested just enough to rise again when called. Not for coin, not for glory, but because that was her place in the night, between rest and waking, between pain and peace, between the worlds. Not all Viking nights were spent in the warmth of a longhouse. Some were spent alone, in exile. Exile was not always loud or violent. Sometimes it came quietly, like a door that did not reopen, a name no longer spoken, a bed left untouched. And so the exiled wandered, into the woods, into the mountains, into the cold arms of a world that no longer claimed them. Their sleep was different. No laughter nearby, no soft snore beside them, no crackling hearth to feed the dreams. Only the wind, the branches, the slow rustle of unseen creatures in the brush. They wrapped themselves in what they carried, cloak, knife, memory, found shelter beneath rock, in hollow trees, beneath sky, dug shallow beds into snow, lay on moss, used the earth as mattress and wall. The stars watched, the moon judged nothing. Some whispered to the gods, not in anger, but in the hope that someone still heard. Some were guilty, some were innocent, all were alone. And yet, even there, sleep came. Rough, cold, broken, but real. Because the body must rest, even when the soul wanders, even when the name is forgotten, even when home is a story told to no one. In the wild, far from firelight, the exile dreamed too, of what was, of what could be, of warmth they once knew, and might never know again. There were nights when sleep was broken, not by dreams, not by thought, but by instinct. Something moved outside, a low crunch of snow, a rustle of straw near the door, a breath too heavy to be wind. The wolf. They lived close, these creatures of fang and shadow, not always seen, but always known. the Vikings respected them, for their strength, for their silence, for the way they waited, and on some nights, they came close, not to attack, not to howl, just to pass, to listen, to remember the scent of warmth behind wooden walls. Inside, a man stirred. He did not rise, he did not speak, but his eyes opened, and they stayed open. A hand found the axe beside the bedding, not lifted, just touched, not fear, awareness. The goat stirred, the dog growled low, not loud enough to wake the others, just enough to say, "I know too." No one moved, and outside, the shape shifted once more, then vanished into the trees. Only afterward did breath return fully. Only then did sleep return, slower now, with edges, because in the Viking world, the wild was never far, the night was never empty, and sometimes the wolf passed close, not to harm, not to haunt, just to remind. Some nights ended with song, not in chorus, not in celebration, just a voice, low, slow, older than memory, rising through the smoke, curling into the beams, a lullaby, a tale half sung, a melody worn thin by time, yet still strong enough to carry hearts into sleep. The singer did not sing to impress. They sang because they always had, because it was how the day ended, how stillness was called down like a curtain. Around them, others listened, eyes closed, limbs relaxed. The fire faded to red, and when the last note hung in the air, fragile as a thread of breath, no one spoke. That was the moment the longhouse truly slept. Not when the fire dimmed, not when the last cup was emptied, but when the song stopped. It was a silence earned, a silence full of presence, of bodies beside bodies, dreams tucked into corners, breath falling in rhythm. Even the animals seemed to know. The goat stopped shifting, the dog curled tighter, the rafters ceased their creak, and in that quiet, the deepest quiet of the night, the world outside softened too. No wind, no wolves, just frost and stars, and in the center of it all, a house full of stories, held by song, stilled by sleep. The Vikings did not believe they were the only ones who dreamed. They watched the goats stir in sleep, legs twitching, noses flaring, and they wondered, what do animals see behind closed eyes? Dogs, especially, were thought to see much. They guarded the longhouse, barked at shadows, growled before danger arrived, and when they slept, they often whimpered or huffed, as if running through the woods again, chasing something only they remembered. Some believed dogs saw spirits before humans did, that in their dreams they ran beside gods or ancestors, that their senses never fully rested. Goats, too, had their place, sacred in myth, practical in life. They shifted in sleep, grumbled in their dreams. Were they remembering fresh grass, the hand that fed them, the hill where they were born? Even the chickens, eyes closed, beaks tucked, seemed to sway in rhythm with something unseen. Animals were not just tools, they were part of the household, watched, respected, understood. Children asked, "Do goats dream of snow?" Elders smiled and answered, "Only when it's deep." And when the fire dimmed and the house lay still, the soft sounds of sleeping animals blended with the breath of the family. One great living rhythm, one shared world. Because sleep was not only for people, it belonged to all who lived under that roof, under that sky, beside that fire. And their dreams too, had meaning. Above every Viking hearth, there was an opening in the roof, the smoke hole. By day, it carried the breath of fire into the sky. By night, it became a window, a quiet eye through which the heavens could peer back in. And when the moon was full, it found its way through. Soft light spilled onto the packed earth floor, silver and pale, shifting as the fire flickered, quiet as falling ash. It touched faces as they slept, glistened on the edge of a blade left near the bed, lit the curl of smoke that rose from the last burning log. No one spoke of it, but all noticed. Some said the moon was a goddess, others, a watcher. Some believed it carried the thoughts of the dead, drifting silently over rooftops, peeking into homes to remember those still living. Children stared up through the hole, eyes wide, watching the stars. Sometimes they whispered goodnight to them, and the moon, steady and slow, moved across the square of open sky like a dream drifting overhead. Its light wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was peace, a soft reminder that above the longhouse, above the dark trees and snow-covered fields, the sky still turned, and someone, something, always watched, not with judgment, but with presence. After weeks on the open sea, wind-bitten, salt-stung, limbs sore from rowing, there came a night every Viking sailor remembered. The first sleep back on land. It wasn't loud, it wasn't feasted, it was quiet, reverent, deep. The moment their boots touched earth again, a shift began. The sway beneath their feet slowly faded. The tension in their backs began to release. And by nightfall, when they stepped into the longhouse once more, the fire looked different. It looked like home. No stars above, no creaking mast, no endless horizon, just roof beams overhead, the smell of stew, and the steady breathing of kin. They laid down slowly, as if uncertain the floor wouldn't move. Some still felt the motion of the waves in their bones, swaying gently, even in stillness. And then, the furs. Thick, heavy, grounded. Sleep came quickly, heavier than usual, like a fall into soil, into safety. They dreamed not of sea battles or distant lands. They dreamed of trees, of snow, of their mother's voice calling them in from the cold. No one asked about what they saw out there, not that night. The sea had its stories, but sleep had its own. And in the silence of the longhouse, wrapped in familiar smells and remembered warmth, they returned to land, to family, to themselves. Not every danger came with teeth or steel. Some crept in with the mist, lingered at the edge of dreams, whispered when the fire burned low. The Vikings knew this, and so, beneath some beds, tucked under straw, pressed into the wood, lay a rune, not for show, not for stories, but for protection. It might be carved into a smooth stone, or scratched on a piece of bone, or inked onto a sliver of bark with careful strokes. Its meaning was known only to the one who placed it. A ward, a shield, a voice made physical. The rune didn't glow, it didn't hum, but it held, it watched. It was placed with intention, on nights when a child had cried too many times in their sleep, when dreams turned cold, when a guest arrived who spoke too softly and smiled too little. Some used runes of Thor, for strength. Others chose the mark of Algiz, the elk's antlers, reaching upward in defense. It didn't matter if others knew. What mattered was belief and intention. Because in the Viking night, not all threats came from the forest. Some came from within, from memory, from the places between sleep and waking. And the rune under the bed, quiet, simple, unseen, was a promise. You are watched. You are protected. You may sleep. Sometimes the roof itself gave way. Not from battle, not from fire, but from wind, fierce and wild, tearing through the thatch like fingers through straw. The storm came suddenly, a howl across the fjord, a crack of frozen beam, and then the sky, open above them, rain, snow or stars. The people moved fast, covering the fire, gathering the children, pressing close. But once the danger passed, there was no shelter left. Just beams, just sky. So they slept anyway, beneath the stars, exhausted, exposed, and yet not afraid. The stars were cold, but they were not cruel. They blinked above like silent gods, like eyes that had seen every storm before this one. They looked down on straw mats and cloaks pulled high, on families curled together, on firelight flickering upward into the vast dark. And for a while, no roof, only the heavens, only breath on wind, only stories whispered beneath constellations. Children pointed to stars they didn't know. Elders gave names. Some lay awake longer, tracing the paths of light across the night sky. And when sleep finally came, it felt different, not enclosed, not hidden, but part of something larger. The house would be rebuilt, the roof mended. But that night, just once, they slept like their ancestors, under stars, uncovered, unafraid. There came a time, slow and sacred, when the elder did not wake as quickly. Not from sickness, not from fear, but from something gentler, a settling. They lay among their people, wrapped in the same wool, beside the same fire, but their breath grew slower, their eyes opened less, their mind turned inward, not from confusion, but from return. And in those final sleeps, they dreamed of rivers they crossed as children, of voices long gone, of the warmth of a mother's hand, of a time before names, before wounds, before weight. They saw the gods, perhaps, not as judges, but as travelers, companions. They heard drums, not of war, but of welcome. Sometimes they murmured names, sometimes they smiled. No one disturbed them. The longhouse knew this sleep. The fire was kept strong, the room was made quieter, Children asked, "Is she leaving?" And the answer was, "No, she is remembering." Because the elder's dream wasn't an escape, it was a bridge between what was and what would be, between breath and silence, between firelight and starlight. And when the breath stopped, it did so gently, like a feather settling, like a flame choosing to dim. She had seen all she needed to see, and in her sleep, she crossed into story. There were places where the trees stood closer, older, quieter, places where the wind moved differently, where birds did not sing after dark, where stones were not touched, only bowed to. The sacred grove, every village had one, or knew of one. A circle of trees, often ash or yew, wrapped in silence and story. Not everyone slept there, only those on vision quests, on spiritual journeys, on the edge of grief, or the brink of purpose. They came alone, carried no fire, lay upon bare earth with only a cloak, a blade and their breath. And as night fell, they listened. The grove did not speak in words, but it spoke through the rustle of leaves, the creak of old bark, the soft tremble of unseen things moving just beyond the edge of vision. Some dreamed deeply, others could not sleep at all, but all felt the weight of it, the sense that they were seen, that the grove remembered things older than men, older than gods. In those few hours of darkness, the sleeper became something in between, not fully of the world, not fully apart from it. And when dawn came, if it came gently, if the birds returned, if the trees let go of their frost, then the person rose changed. Not louder, not braver, but steadier. Because to sleep in a sacred grove was not to rest, it was to be witnessed. The dead did not shout, they whispered. And in the Viking world, sleep was one of the only times those whispers could be heard. It might come as a dream, but deeper, a vision not quite shaped by the mind, not quite free of it either. A father who had passed seasons ago, appearing at the edge of the hearth, a grandmother's hand brushing a cheek, a face that had faded in waking life, now clear, now close. They did not bring fear, they brought reminders of duties unfinished, of names forgotten, of strength carried forward, generation to generation. Some woke with tears, others with resolve, and some said nothing at all, just looked toward the rising smoke in the morning light and nodded, as if answering someone no one else could see. To dream of the dead was not strange, it was expected, honored, treasured. For in these visits, ancestors reminded the living, you are not alone. Their blood still warmed the body, their stories still moved the tongue, their choices still shaped the path ahead. And at night, when the fire was low and the house still, they came quietly, not to linger, just to speak, just to bless, and then to return to the silence, where they waited for the next dreamer. The longhouse has grown still. The fire, once strong and crackling, now rests in a bed of glowing coals, warm but fading, a breath of heat, a memory of light. Around it, sleep has taken everyone. No voices, no footsteps, just the soft rhythm of breath, of bodies curled beneath wool and fur, of animals resting nearby, of silence thick as snow. Outside, the first thread of grey touches the sky, a hint of morning, a promise. But it does not rush. The night lingers a little longer, as if unwilling to leave, as if it too has found rest within these walls, among the people who dream not just of battles, or gods, or stars, but of warmth, of home, of one another. In the shadows, the last ember flares once, a final flicker of gold, and then sinks into ash, and yet something remains, not light, not sound, but peace, the kind of peace that only night can bring, the kind that stays in the bones, long after the fire dies, long after the stories end, the kind that carries you into morning without fear. Outside, the birds begin to stir, the sky brightens. Inside, the house sleeps on, for just a moment more, and in that breathless pause between dark and dawn, the Viking world dreams. And now, if you're still here, still listening, thank you. If this quiet story helped you find calm tonight, please do one small thing before you close your eyes. Tap the like button. It tells the YouTube wins that this content helped someone, and maybe it will help someone else too. And if you want more nights like this, more boring stories, slow voices and quiet rhythms, you can subscribe now. That way, when sleep is far away, this space will already be here waiting for you. You can also leave a comment below. Just a word, just a thought, even something as simple as "I'm here." You'd be surprised how many people feel less alone when they see that someone else stayed till the end. And finally, If there's anything you'd like to see, hear, or explore next time, leave your thoughts below. I always read them. Close your eyes, rest your hands, and drift. Good night.